Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I want to analyze young drivers in top teams. And I kind of want to use this as a reference point for our two young drivers, Liam Lawson and Kimi Antonelli, who will both be starting their first full seasons in Formula One at relatively competitive teams based on what we saw at preseason testing. And so today I'm going to be going over a variety of drivers from last 20 years or so. Drivers who have either had their first or second full season in Formula One, be in either front-running machinery or cars that were, I'd say, very, very upper midfield. And we're going to go in order. We're going to talk about some very, very good seasons at the beginning, and we're going to kind of make our way down to seasons that are a bit less good. It's not a super precise ranking, so I don't want you to take away from this that the order that we present these drivers these seasons in is some kind of definitive ranking about how I feel each of those seasons were, but it's kind of just a relative list of how good those seasons were. I feel. So starting off with number one, I would say kind of the gold standard, the benchmark for any rookie season in a top team is Lewis Hamilton's 2007 season. He was 21 years of age at the start of that season. That age is going to be from January 1st. Of course, driving for McLaren, who, based on my analysis, was basically tied for the best car that year with an average minimum finishing position of 1.64. Of course, two-time defending champion Alonso was his teammate, and of course Alonso coming over from Renault. Out-qualified his teammate Alonso 9-8 over the course of the season with a median qualifying delta of 0.07 of a second. Now again, refueling era, so again these stats are not as good, I would say, at estimating pace gaps as they are in the new system that we've had since 2010. Now, of course, for Alonso, I would say definitely struggled in 2007 relative to what he did in his title-winning years and what he did after. And again, a lot of that was down to the fact that, one, it was a new team, and two, it was his first season using the Michelin, or I believe, no, using Bridgestone tires, I should say, because he was, of course, using Michelin's when he was at Renault. So again, new tires to get used to, new team, and Lewis Hamilton is generally regarded as one of being the most prepared rookies in F1 history, in the sense that McLaren put him through a ton of testing programs in that year before he made his F1 debut. Now, of course, looking at points, 109 apiece between himself and Alonso. When you look at expected points for this season, Hamilton 94% and for Alonso 102%. So it says that analysis suggests that Alonso was the slightly better driver in the races. And again, given that Hamilton out-qualified Alonso and the fact that they finished level 1 points, that does make some sense. But that being said, overall in the race model delta, Hamilton has a slight edge there with a positive 0.015 in that metric. Of course, didn't end up winning the championship that year, finished second in the championship, missing out on that title in the final race by 1 point to Kimi Räikkönen. Could have been a rookie F1 champion. That, of course, would have been a massive story. But unfortunately, through what happened in China, where he basically beats the car on the pit entry, and a pretty sketchy last race in Brazil, again, I think mechanical problems had a large part of the role in that. Unfortunately, wasn't able to win that title. But nonetheless, very, very impressive driver that first season. Excellent that he was basically, on the pace of those front-running cars. He was a match for Alonso. And again, very, very close on pace with, I would say, Raikkonen, definitely better than Massa. 12 podiums over the course of the season and 4 wins. Now, if either Antonelli or Lawson could have this kind of season, that would be, absolutely amazing. I would say realistically, neither of them are going to have this level of season. Antonelli, of course, very, very highly thought of prospect, but he is 18, 3 years younger than Hamilton was, or I guess 3 or 4 years, depending on how you count the birthdays, younger than Hamilton. And so again, I think also a lot less testing is available in F1 now than it was in the past. Now, moving on to our next driver, and that is Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc's 2019 season. Of course, first season in Ferrari, second season in F1. He was 21 years of age at the start of that season, driving for Ferrari. Like I said, it had a average minimum finishing position of 2.48, which was the second best amongst the 10 teams that year. Teammate, of course, was Sebastian Vettel, qualifying head-to-head 11-9 in Leclerc's favor, so outqualified Vettel in his first season together with a median qualifying delta of 0.074 seconds. So again, I would say definitely the better of the two drivers in qualifying, but it was relatively close. And a new stat that I've been working on the last couple of months, which is quality rating, and it's basically a non-paired metric. So basically, traditionally, you would look at everything simply through the lens of how they did relative to their teammates. And again, if you want to compare the whole grid, it's obviously not a very good system because, if you have a bad teammate and you have a half second on them in qualifying, again, that's not really relevant. So again, this is a new metric that I've been working on that tries to deal with that and tries to look at all 20 drivers. Again, that would require its own video, but for that quality rating, negative 0.452, which ranks second of the 20 drivers on the grid. So saying he was the second best qualifier that year according to that metric. Now, when you look at points, did come out ahead on points there, 264 to 240 over Vettel. But interestingly, a bit similar to Hamilton and Alonso, when you look at points above expected, 94% for Leclerc, 103% for Vettel. So Vettel scored slightly more points compared to than you would expect based on his starting positions, but still, a pretty good score for Leclerc there. And race model delta, a positive 0.446. So again, slightly better in there on that level for Leclerc. 10 podiums over the course of the season, 2 wins, 7 pole positions as well. I don't have the pole stats up, but again, this was a very, very strong season for Leclerc. Qualifying pace especially was exceptional. Race pace was still very, very good. Probably not quite as good as Verstappen, probably not quite as good as Hamilton, but still, he was definitely looked very, very comfortable in front-running machinery. Again, for either Lawson or for Antonelli, this would still be, a very, very good rookie's first season if these are the kinds of results that they could have. Now, moving on, and speaking of the teammate of one of those two young drivers that we're going to have this year, Max Verstappen. So Max Verstappen 2016, his second year in F1, his first full season, or technically it's his first season in Red Bull. Again, those first four races were in Toro Rosso, but for all intents and purposes, it was the majority of the season. 18 years of age, so again, same age as Antonelli coming into this season, driving for a Red Bull team that, according to my analysis, 2.67. So again, second best team that year in that metric. Now lost the quality head-to-head to Daniel Ricciardo, lost that 6-11 with a median qualifying delta of 0.213 seconds. So again, Ricciardo was the better of the two drivers in qualifying. Again, 2/10 is definitely no small margin either. Quality rating, however, a bit of an interesting one there, a negative 0.336, so which ranks 9th. So it suggests that of the 20 drivers in F1 2016, Verstappen was the 9th best qualifier there. For now, looking at the race results, looking at just the races where he was teammates with Ricciardo, 191 points to 224 Ricciardo. So again, about a 30 points gap there. But interestingly, I think unlike Hamilton or unlike Leclerc, when you look at points above expected, Verstappen actually had a score above 100%. So 107%. Suggests that he had 7% more than you would expect based on his starting positions, compared to Ricciardo's 98%. So again, interesting that it was better than Ricciardo. And again, I've been watching the 2016 season on F1 TV about halfway through, and the commentators themselves, Brundle and Crofty, are, marveling about how good Verstappen's race pace was so early on and at such a young age. Race model score, race model delta for the pairing between Verstappen and Ricciardo, negative 0.248. So it suggests, according to that, Ricciardo is slightly better, but again, pretty small difference there. 7 podiums for Verstappen over that season, with 1 win, of course, coming in his first race for Red Bull, very, very famously at the 2016 Spanish Grand Prix. Now, of course, haven't finished watching the season, so can't comment on the whole thing, but from what I've watched, it was very, very impressive from Verstappen. There were some races where, there was a bit of inconsistency there, looking at Monaco that year, for example, races that were not so good. But for the most part, he looked very, very, especially in the European rounds, looked very, very comfortable in the races. Race pace was very, very strong. All right, now moving on to the next driver, 2009 Sebastian Vettel. So again, this is another season I haven't watched yet, so can't give super detailed analysis on this. But 21 years of age that year, driving for Red Bull, minimum points, average minimum finishing position 2.06, which ranks first, so actually above the Brawn. Interestingly enough, despite the fact that Brawn, of course, won the constructors championship that year. Qualifying definitely very lopsided, 14-2 in Vettel's favor over his teammate Mark Webber, with a median qualifying delta of 2.9 tenths of a second. Again, this was the last season in the refueling era, so it's possible that affected the stats somewhat. But nonetheless, still Vettel much better driver in qualifying. When you look at points, 84 for Vettel, 69.5 for Webber. I know those totals seemed low. It was under the old point scoring system where the the winner only got 10 points. When you look at points above expected, a bit of an interesting result here. 91% for Vettel, 84% for Webber. So both of them below 100%, suggesting they weren't getting the most out of the car. And for Vettel that year, he did have some scruffy moments. I believe he had 5 retirements as well. And in a 17 race season, that's quite a lot. And a couple of those were definitely, unforced errors or crashes, collisions with other drivers. For example, the Australian Grand Prix, where it came together with Kubica. But nonetheless, was the better driver of the two between himself and Webber, race model score being a positive 1.590. 8 podiums over the course of the season, 4 wins as well. Of course, none of those 4 were his first win in F1. His first win in F1 coming in the 2008 Italian Grand Prix, which was his first full season in F1. Of course, he had made his F1 debut the season before, so 2007. So again, he'd already had a year of experience before joining Red Bull, and Red Bull, of course, being a front-running team at the start of those new regulations, generally being, finishing second in the constructors in the end. But again, according to this metric, was the fastest car over the course of the full season. Now, again, for Vettel, I haven't watched this season, so I can't really comment a whole lot, but I do think overall, pretty strong season for Vettel. Again, but I think some, crashes, issues here and there, and those were things that would definitely be ironed out over the coming years as he would go on to win the next 4 constructor or drivers championship. Now, 2023, this is a season that probably not really a front-running team, but still, for half the season last year, 2 years ago at this point, it's 2025 already. The 2023 McLaren was, arguably the second best car. So for Oscar Piastri in his rookie season, 21 years of age, driving for that McLaren, average minimum finishing position not great, especially compared to some of the other cars we're going to be talking about today. 4.95, which ranked 5th, so below Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Aston Martin. So again, car not especially strong, but again, for that second half of the season, the car was very, very good. Qualifying head-to-head 6-16 against his teammate Lando Norris, so out-qualified there with a median qualifying delta of 0.179 seconds. Quality rating a negative 0.089, which ranks 11, so about average is what Piastri's rating was for that season. And when you look at the points, 97 to 205, so just under half of Norris's points. And when you look at points above expected, he only scored 76% of his expected points compared to Norris, who scored 122%. So again, a little bit off Norris's pace in qualifying and off Norris's pace in the race as well. If you looked at the top 5 teams from 2023, I would say Piastri was probably the second weakest driver in that group, although actually probably third weakest. I'd say overall probably a little bit better than Perez, and of course better than Stroll. So it was a good rookie season, not exceptional. And again, he didn't get 2 podiums coming in Japan and in Qatar, but of course no wins. But again, based on how dominant the Red Bull was, not really a shame or a slight that he didn't get any wins. And race model delta as well, just to finish off the stats, a negative 1.884. Now for Piastri's rookie season, I think it was a pretty good season overall. He was Formula 2 champion, and then of course had a year off before joining McLaren. So again, he would have been a little bit rusty in terms of wheel-to-wheel racecraft, as that's something that you can't really work on when you're a simulator test driver. I think, it was a good season, but I think he still had a lot of room to improve. He improved last year, and again, we'll see how he improves this year. If either Antonelli or, Lawson could have a season like Piastri's 23 season, I think that would be, a really, really good achievement. And again, this kind of season, I think, is in the more realistic category for kind of what we could expect from either of those two drivers coming in. I think some of the seasons we talked about before, Leclerc's, Verstappen's, Hamilton's, those are basically some of the best rookie seasons that we've seen, or I guess for some of those drivers, not rookies, but some of the best kind of first seasons we've seen in a front running team in the last 20 years. So again, not super realistic to expect those kinds of heights, in my opinion. Now, as we move along, another driver who, again, not really the fastest car, but still a relatively quick machine. And this is Kevin Magnussen in 2014. 22 years of age that season, driving for McLaren. This was, of course, the first year of the new regulations. And again, one of the reasons that teams often don't want rookies those first years is because when they test past cars, for example, for all the rookies coming in this year, they can test the 23 car, they can test the 2024 car at, postseason test, rookie test, for example. And so they can kind of get an idea for how these ground effect cars work. But when you start as your rookie season as the first year of a new set of regulations, there's basically absolutely nothing to go off of, and you're not really sure when F1 cars is really supposed to feel like. And you don't really have a ton of experience with these new cars, just like everyone else will. But unlike everyone else, you don't really have that experience to kind of pull off of to say, oh, with this set of car, this is how I should drive. With X set of car, this is how I should drive, right? So for Magnussen, it was a bit of a tough learning curve that first season. And for a McLaren team that was kind of on the downhill as well, I think he was kind of unfairly blamed for some of McLaren's ills that year. But for McLaren, average minimum finishing position 5.79, which ranked fifth over the course of the season, behind Ferrari, Williams, Red Bull, and Mercedes. Now, for qualifying, I think honestly did a pretty good job qualifying head-to-head 9-10 in his teammate Button's favor, with a median qualifying delta of 0.039. So very, very close to Button in qualifying. Quality rating as well, very, very strong, a negative 0.310, which ranked 6th out of the 22 drivers on the grid that year. However, when you look at the race data, things were not so good. Only scored 55 points compared to his teammates' 126, with his points above expected being only 55%, and his teammate being 124%. Now, when you look at race model delta as well, not particularly strong, negative 2.107. So again, in the races, very, very scruffy. Pace was pretty inconsistent and had some crashes in races where he was running pretty high. I remember the Belgian Grand Prix 2014 as one particular example where I think, Magnussen was just a little bit too aggressive, got a bunch of penalties and really cost him a big load of points in the end, whereas his teammate Button was quite a bit more opportunistic, was able to pick up consistent, P4, P5 finishes over the course of the season. Did get, of course, that one podium in his very, very first race, but after that, no more podiums. McLaren wasn't really a consistent podium threat anyway, but it's still a very opportunistic result in that first race, and of course, no wins. So for Magnussen's season, again, qualifying results look pretty good, but race results were pretty bad. So again, I wouldn't be too entirely surprised if Antonelli in particular, qualifying results were good, relatively close to Russell, but still very, very inconsistent results in the races. Mistakes here and there, and a couple crashes as well could definitely skew those race results to make it a little bit worse than it actually was. All right, now moving on to some results that I think we can pretty confidently say are not so good. And these are the kind of seasons that I think that Lawson and Antonelli are going to probably try to avoid having seasons on this level. So first we have Romain Grosjean's rookie season in 2012. Now, of course, he had made his F1 debut a couple of seasons earlier, 2009, filling in for Nelson Piquet Jr. Had basically been kicked out after Crashgate had been revealed. But this was still his first full season in F1. 25 years of age, driving for the Lotus team that, according to my analysis, 3.95 was the average minimum finishing position, which ranked 4th, but still, a front-running car. So again, this was, a very, very good car in a season that was, very, very unpredictable, very pretty crazy results. A lot of teams really struggled to understand the Pirelli tires, and that meant that you had some pretty crazy results unpredictable results in qualifying and in the races throughout the season. Now, for qualifying head-to-head against his teammate Kimi Raikkonen, actually the better of the two drivers there, out-qualified his teammate Raikkonen 12-7 with a median qualifying delta of negative 0.063. That being said, it was Raikkonen's first season coming back to F1 after he basically got kicked out of Ferrari. But still, out-qualifying your world champion teammate in your rookie season is still a pretty good accomplishment. And when you look at the qualifying rating, though, negative 0.111, which ranked 9th of the 24 drivers on that grid. Race results, unfortunately, not so good, and this was something that was definitely pretty infamous at the time. 96 points for Grosjean that season compared to Raikkonen's 207. Points above expected, 75%, so not great there compared to his teammate Raikkonen's 138%. And race model delta, negative 1.462. Now, we did manage 3 podiums that season, so again, not bad. But I do think, many observers say that Lotus car that year was much better than either of the drivers showed. And that if, for example, Alonso was driving that car, perhaps he would have been able to challenge for the title, even win the title, much like he did when he was driving that Ferrari. So again, many say that the car was much better than it actually was, and it was simply Grosjean and Raikkonen letting it down. Again, that's, maybe a somewhat controversial opinion, but again, I can kind of see the merit in it based on what would happen a couple years later when Raikkonen and Alonso became teammates at Ferrari. Now, of course, for Grosjean, that season, he was very, very well known for crashing. He, of course, had that massive crash at the 2012 Belgian Grand Prix on that opening corner, taking out Alonso, taking out Hamilton, taking out Kobayashi and Perez as well, I believe, in that, and getting himself a race ban. Of course, this was before the super license point system was in place, but simply the stewards, the FIA, felt that that crash was so egregious that they had to ban him for the very next race. But of course, that was not Grosjean's only crash that year. He also had crashes with Mark Webber at the 2012 Japanese Grand Prix. He also made contact with Maldonado at the opening race in Australia. And so this was a race where Grosjean had quite a few incidents, a lot of things going wrong involving contact with other drivers. And this was unfortunately kind of wheel-to-wheel racing, making mistakes under pressure. This was unfortunately something that would continue for Grosjean's F1 career, and unfortunately, it's also kind of what ended his F1 career when he collided with Kvyat at the Bahrain Grand Prix in 2020. Now, for either Lawson or Antonelli, probably wouldn't want to have a Grosjean kind of style rookie season, crashes, incidents all over the place, especially with the cost cap being in place now, something that wasn't a thing in 2012. The qualifying results, I think, were pretty good. So again, that's one thing that kind of keeps us from being at the very, very bottom of this list at this end of this video. But still, a very, very inconsistent season with, some very, very scruffy races. Now, moving on to 2008, and that is Heikki Kovalainen's second full season F1, but his first season at a top team in McLaren. Now, 26 years of age, so a little bit older than some of the other drivers in this video, and definitely, older than either Lawson or Antonelli. Driving for McLaren that year, they had a 2.61 as their average minimum finishing position, which ranked second, interestingly enough, behind Ferrari that year. And overall, not a great season by Kovalainen. Again, similar to 2009, this is a season I haven't watched. So again, I can't give super detailed analysis, but we can still go over the stats. So qualifying head-to-head 4-14 in Hamilton's favor. Median qualifying delta 0.288. So again, not great. They're almost 0.3 of a second. And qualifying results overall not that great. Did get a single pole position. I believe in was I in Britain? I believe that was the British Grand Prix, which we got that sole pole position. Points, race results not great either. Only got 53 points compared to Hamilton's 98. Points above expected, 86% compared to his teammates' 99. And race model delta, a negative 1.889. And again, this was a car there where his teammate, Lewis Hamilton, won the Drivers' Championship, and he was only able to manage 3 podiums and a single win. So not a great season. He would only end up having one more season at McLaren before he was dropped. He was sent down to Caterham/Lotus, and that was kind of the end of his F1 career. Never really got a shot in a competitive team again. So for either Lawson, I think for Lawson especially, this is unfortunately something that could happen. He could basically have 1 or 2 seasons in Red Bull, and that would be it for his F1 career if he doesn't perform particularly well. For Antonelli, I think because he's younger and I think because Mercedes have invested so much in his career, I think he will have a bit of a longer leash than Lawson will. But still, a season like Kovalainen's 2008 season is definitely one that both of them would want to avoid. Now, we're up to the final 2 drivers on this list, and funnily enough, both of them are Red Bull drivers. So first, we're going to take a look at Gasly's 2019 season. And of course, this is just the first 12 races, the ones where he drove for Red Bull. So 22 years of age at the start of the season, driving for a Red Bull team that over the course of the full season, its average minimum finishing position was 3.38, which ranked 3rd behind Ferrari and Mercedes, but well clear of, I believe, McLaren in 4th. Qualifying head-to-head 2-10, and again, I think that result kind of flatters Gasly because there were those 2 wins in his category. One of them was the Canadian Grand Prix where Verstappen got caught out by Magnussen's crash, and the other was the Azerbaijan Grand Prix where he only set a time in Q1 because he basically missed the weight bridge in a practice session, I believe, and then set a really, really fast lap time in Q1 and then didn't set a lap time at all for Q2. So basically, how I decide to do is I basically just use the Q1 lap time, and Gasly's time was better than Verstappen. So both of those though kind of skew the picture somewhat, especially with a small sample size. But overall, the median qualifying delta ends up being 0.405 seconds. So again, over 410, so not great there. With a quality rating of plus 0.149, which ranks 18th on the grid for that whole season. But of course, it's scored for the whole season, so I've just taken the Red Bull part. And if you basically took the Red Bull part and compared against everyone else's full season, would have been 18th. I think only better than Kubica and only better than Giovinazzi. So still a really, really rough start to that 2019 season for Gasly. Now, looking at the race results, not a whole lot better either. 63 points compared to 181 for his teammate Verstappen. Now, when you look at points above expected, it's actually not so bad. I think one of those results, the one in Azerbaijan, I believe, he had a mechanical failure, and the points above expected model also takes reliability into effect. So that's why I think it turns out to, because it's a bit of a small sample size, it looks a little bit better than it actually was. So 89% for Gasly, so again, not awful, but compared to Verstappen's 141%, it's still an absolutely massive difference. So again, that just looking at those 2 numbers alone suggests that Verstappen was basically driving out of his world, and Gasly was just relatively just a little bit below what you would expect. But nonetheless, race model delta negative 3.817, which is absolutely awful. I did my list, I think, last year, last November, I believe, where I basically looked at this 15 biggest gaps in teammates for my race model. And I think Gasly and Verstappen's 2019 part season was one of the top ones. So again, this is, historically bad by Gasly, and this is something that both Lawson and Antonelli are really going to want to avoid. 12 races, no podiums, no wins, and basically dropped during the summer break. Now, of course, his replacement after that summer break was none other than Alex Albon. Now, of course, we could talk about Albon's partial 2019 season, but nonetheless, again, one, it's a bit of a small sample size, and number 2, being thrown into a team mid-season is definitely very, very tough. You don't know the car, you don't have practice with the car, your teammate knows the car much better. So again, not super representative data. So instead, we're going to look at his 2020 season. So 23 years of age at the start of that year, driving for Red Bull, of course. And that was a team that had an average minimum finishing position of 2.82, which ranked 2nd on the grid. Qualifying, not good. Whitewashed by his teammate Verstappen 0-17 with a median qualifying delta of 0.486, which is actually worse than Gasly's partial season the year before. Quality rating also not good. A plus 0.36, which ranked 18th of the 20 drivers on that grid. When you look at race results, 105 points to 215, and points above expected 68%, which is pretty bad. I think if you look at just the cars that I would say are true front-running cars, so we're not going to include the 2 McLarens of Magnussen and Piastri, I think that 68% is probably the worst of all the drivers I've talked about today. So that's definitely going to be something that both, again, like I said, Lawson and Antonelli are both going to want to avoid. And for Verstappen over that season, 115% for him. Race model delta, negative 4.645. So again, absolutely often, I believe it's one of the worst, if not the worst, for my race model in the kind of new rejigged one that I did over the winter. 2 podiums over the course of that season, one in Bahrain and one in Mugello. Again, one of the one-off tracks that we had in 2020, of course, no wins. So for Albon, it was a really, really tricky season. Qualifying was a bit tricky. The car was very difficult to drive, very, very oversteery, and that, of course, meant that Verstappen was okay with it, but Albon really, really struggled. The midfield as well that year, very, very close to, relatively speaking, closer to the front than had been in past years. So a bad qualifying for Albon meant that instead of starting 6th like Gasly would have the year before, it meant that he might have been starting, 10th or 12th behind, the Racing Point, the Renault, or the McLarens. Race pace, I think, was, again, a bit of an issue and really, really struggled getting past cars. And, of course, we all remember the radio moment at the Eiffel Grand Prix where he said they were racing me so hard. And I think really that radio message plus some of the results after really, unfortunately, spelled the end for Albon at Red Bull. Was dropped at the end of that season, had a year on the sidelines as kind of a test reserve driver, but, of course, made his F1 comeback in 2022 driving for Williams. So, kind of to conclude this video, what can we say for both Liam Lawson and Kimi Antonelli? I think realistically speaking, their seasons, I think for Lawson, it's going to be a real challenge. And again, because he's going up against such a big talent in Verstappen, I think the expectations and just in terms of teammate gaps are going to be that things are going to be pretty bad. I would say hopefully better than Albon, hopefully better than Gasly. Maybe, he can have a season like, just in terms of race small scores, a season like Grosjean or even Kovalainen would be an upgrade on what Perez was doing the last couple of years. So again, I think that's reasonable. For Antonelli, I think for just very small score, I think that's reasonable as well. For points above expected, interestingly enough, almost every driver I think I've talked about, almost every driver that we've talked about, except for Verstappen 2016, had a points above expected less than 100. So I think pretty safe to say that both Antonelli and Lawson are probably going to have scores below 100 as well, which basically just means that they're going to, whatever they do in qualifying, the results in the races will probably be a little bit worse than for what you would expect. So there you go. There's my kind of analysis looking at young drivers in their first season in top teams. Again, it'll be really interesting to see all 6 rookies that we have in F1 2025. But I think especially for Antonelli and Lawson, there'll be extra attention on them, given that they're going to be in front-running machinery, and there's going to be quite a lot of pressure on both of them, I would say. So anyway, drivers, this video is already 32 minutes. My throat's quite gone at this point, given that I do everything in one take. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you're still watching up to this point, and I'll be back with my F2 season preview in a couple days' time, and then very, very close to Australia, and I'll have my race preview for the Australian Grand Prix. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.